welcome to our show. I have Markham Councillor for Ward 2. Howard Shore is with me today, and it's a hot summer day, and so I wouldn't even think about blow drying my hair because those thunderstorms are on their way. I think they're going to be rolling in pretty soon, Howard. But we want to talk about a little bit about Vaughan and Markham because we're neighbors, and I think we're good neighbors. And I still like to complain every chance I get that Thornhill was sliced into two, and half is part of the town of Markham, the other half is part of the city of Vaughan, and I feel that Thornhill does not get a strong voice because of it. But I'm not expecting any changes in the boundaries of the city, so I just like to point it out whenever I can. So here we are with Howard Shore, and Howard, you're having fun. This is a new job for you. You're wearing a lot of hats, I know that. We all are, I think, and people who are interested in politics wear many hats. But what are you enjoying the most about this new career change for you as a Markham City Councillor?
Well, first of all, Gila, it's a pleasure to be here. I don't have to worry about my hair curling and any of the humidity today. It stays short. And I agree with you about Thornhill as well. It has its own unique identity. I think the Vaughan portion of Thornhill from the rest of Vaughan, and I certainly think that the Markham portion of Thornhill from the rest of Markham. There's this sort of psychological and physical divide of the 404 that I think makes Ward 1 and Ward 2 in Thornhill a little bit unique and different from the rest of Markham, and certainly more in tune with the Vaughan side of Thornhill, so we can have some interesting conversations there. Perhaps you're suggesting that we create a new city of Thornhill?
I wouldn't mind, but nobody else wants to hear about it, and every now and then people start to shriek at me, go back to Quebec and fight with them about separation and amalgamations and things like that. But it does, I do wish that I had lived here at the time that they were making the changes, because it was something that I would have not have been happy with, and I would have been quite willing to get vocal about. Because Thornhill is a historical village, we both agree with that, and I think that because of the division along Yonge Street, the whole nature and the whole, what could have been wasn't able to happen. It's difficult with two cities, even two cities who get along, and even though it's all part of York Region, it's tough. And whenever I visit Unionville, when you walk along Unionville Main Street, don't you think, well, this should have been in Thornhill?
Yes, but it's not
to a part.
There's certainly a quaintness amongst with Main Street Unionville that I think is absolutely fabulous that doesn't exist elsewhere. But I actually have a little bit of a bone to pick with Vaughan.
Okay.
Because as a Thornhill partner, and you mentioned the historic nature, we've got the historic Thornhill Village Festival coming up in September 17th, so I hope that all of your viewers will come out and attend the festival. But I'm not sure if you know that when it comes to organizing the festival, Vaughan doesn't put in its fair share of dollars.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. Because it's run by the Historical Society.
That's right.
Of Thornhill. It's not run, people often assume that it's put on by the city.
But the two cities, Vaughan and Markham, both contribute. Let me rephrase that. The Historical Society comes to both Markham and Vaughan asking for support. They need certain logistical support from the municipalities as well as the region, closing off Yonge Street, for instance, putting up barricades, road closures, et cetera, et
and
cetera.
What about cleanup? The city's
and cleanup,
yeah.
Absolutely. Markham actually gives them, it costs the Historical Society about $50,000 to $60,000 to put on the festival. They recoup some of that money through admission and ticket charges, and they do raffles and whatnot.
And booths, they do rent out booths.
Absolutely. But Markham actually gives them cold hard cash. Vaughan puts in zero.
Really? Oh,
$0. Now they give certain things as services in kind, which we do as well, but apparently it's a Vaughan policy, and I've taken it up with the local councillor who sits on the committee with myself and Valerie Burke on the committee for the festival. But for such an absolutely fabulous event that really benefits and highlights the uniqueness of Yonge Street, both Vaughan and Markham, I mean, it's a shared regional road that we've got, disappointed that Vaughan doesn't help out the festival at all with actual dollars. Because
And what is their reasoning? That because they don't
Vaughan
finance
apparently has a policy that they don't put money into any community festivals or activities.
I find that quite shocking, because to me that's partly what a city does, is to promote and to bring some culture to the residents and to bring local entertainment. And
Maybe you could take that up with a local councillor.
You know what, I was asked a couple of years ago to get involved with the festival, and my beef with the festival is that they still insist on doing it on Saturday, when the Orthodox Jewish community has grown by leaps and bounds and is a huge percentage now of the ward where the festival takes place. And I feel it should be either done over Saturday and Sunday. I don't see any reason why the churches, you know, I've even spoken to people who are very involved in the local churches, and they said that they can do their church services a little bit earlier if necessary and not do the later morning services. The festival could start an hour later on a Sunday. I was never really given a reason that I understood why we couldn't have the festival on a Sunday and be inclusive for everybody. I'm involved in too many projects with the Orthodox Jewish community to then get involved in something that only takes place on Saturday. If it took place on Saturday and Sunday, with the bulk of it being on Sunday at least, but that's kind of my issue. Now, I'm not going to tell them to change it. That's not my place to tell them. All I can say is, though, I can't be somebody who's directly involved. I do promote the festival, and I do, you know, suggest to people to go to the festival, but I can't be that closely involved.
But I digressed. Your question was, do I enjoy the job? And the answer is absolutely. What I find interesting when people, either friends of mine or people in the community, they'll ask, so are you enjoying being a counselor? And my immediate answer is absolutely, I love it. What troubles me is when I think about it, it kind of means to me that a lot of folks, they're so surprised that I'm actually loving what I'm doing, that it must mean that a lot of people really are unhappy about the work that they're doing.
A lot of people aren't happy with the work they're doing.
That's really disappointing.
And I think it's partly because of expectations. I think a lot of times people would like their hobby to be their job, and realistically, not everybody can pull that off. A lot of it is,
well, this isn't a hobby.
No, but I think that a lot of people do have an interest, and unfortunately they don't like their job because their job isn't something they find interesting. They weren't able to find a job that, you know, they're sort of torn between. Maybe they're in a band, but their job is to be a lawyer. You know, we all kind of know people like that. They weren't able to, the law was kind of the backup, hoping to have this big success in their passion, which unfortunately doesn't work out for everybody. I think that politics, for a lot of people, it's a little bit like getting married. They love running for office, they love winning. You know, that's so exciting, election day when you win. You know, I'm sure it was a real high moment in your life. But then the reality sets in, which is it's a job. There are responsibilities, and you cannot please everybody all the time. And it takes work to create that relationship, you know, just kind of you've got a relationship with your constituents, and you have to answer them in a timely fashion, and you have to address all their concerns, and you have to be honest with people, and people don't always appreciate honesty, but I think that that's part of the job, is to explain to people, look, you know what, you have needs, but we're trying to balance everybody's needs, and we can't please everybody.
And the reality is that, yes, I do love what I'm doing. There are frustrating parts of the job as well. And that's the reality with anything that anybody does, whether it's as an optometrist or whether it's as a politician or as a real estate agent. There's things that you gravitate towards because you might be a very people-oriented person, but there is a paperwork aspect to any job. There's an administrative component. Dealing with government means dealing with a bureaucracy, means a slower pace, and that's a very frustrating thing to me. I like getting things done, and government means that you have to temper that expectation of getting things done very quickly, with the reality of a process. And process is, I think, a lot of folks out in the community wonder, you know, why can't government be more like a business, and why can't things get done quickly? And I was probably one of those people as well.
Well, it's a little bit like a court system. You know, you can't have afterwards people complaining that the protocol wasn't followed, that the process wasn't done properly. So you have to follow, and that's very slow because there's so many different people and so many different needs. And then sometimes I think what's super frustrating is at the 11th hour, you think it's all done, everything's complete, you're at the final vote, final ruling, and then all of a sudden, wait a minute. Somebody has an appeal, somebody takes it to the OMB, somebody puts a wrench in the wheels, and everything comes to a grinding halt. There's a lot of development, obviously, going on in the suburbs. And I think that it's really tough sometimes for the city councillors and the regional councillors and the mayors to address the concerns of the developers. And the fact is what people complain about the developers are providing a product, but the consumers are really driving, a lot of times, the developers. And people still want those single-family homes, and we're having a tough time selling the idea of, you know, I call them condovilles. I read an article recently in the Globe and Mail, and that was the term they used, condovilles, high-density communities. And I think Markham is really at the forefront of developing some all-encompassing communities. And was that something sort of you went into accepting, or you've learned to accept since you became a councillor? Were you supportive of the sort of the high-density demand that the province is pushing, or?
Here's the reality. You know, I felt like I was going right into the frying pan after the election, because one issue that I heard about from day one of getting into the election, and then certainly every single day since, was the Shops on Steels development at Don Mills and Steels. And I can tell you that literally from the first day that I registered for the election until the final OMB decision came out, there wasn't a single day that a portion of which did not include talking about, whether it was to staff or whether it was to constituents, about what was happening with the development.
Well, I think it was the German Mills Residents
the German Mills
area, the Residents Association. They were very, very well organized and well informed.
Extraordinarily so. But here's the reality, and one of the things that I said to folks over the few months, unless we are going to close Ontario's borders, or close York Region's borders, or close Markham's borders, and say nobody shall immigrate in from wherever, another province or another country, we have a burgeoning province. We have a burgeoning region. We are going to be growing by 150,000 people over the next 20 years here in Markham. And we have to have places for people to live and grow and work in communities. And we have to, if we're making certain decisions that there's a green belt, and we don't want to encroach on that, we want to have a certain environmental protection portion of our lands. That was a huge discussion on Markham Council during the last term, and fully support protecting the green belt. But so now you've eliminated a portion of lands that are developable. Okay, so now you've said, the province has said there's a Places to Grow Act. And we, unless we're going to put those limitations and those borders and say, you can't cross over Steeles and move into Markham, and you can't cross over Yonge, we have to make certain intensification then makes sense. Provided you got, and here's the
infrastructure.
Right, right. So that's my big the cry in my mind is that we make all of these decisions without proper infrastructure. And infrastructure isn't just transit. I mean, that's a biggie. That's probably the biggie. But it's also adequate sewer and water capacity. It's adequate resources from a community point of view. Putting aside Shops on Steeles, I got a call over the past couple of weeks from people who live in the Leachcroft area, which is just east of Bayview and south of Highway 7. Leachcroft is one of the most densely populated areas in Markham right now, if not the most densely populated area. It doesn't have a community center. It doesn't have, it's not on the radar to have a school. It doesn't have a full community park yet, although it will within the next year and a half. These are other infrastructure issues aside for transportation. But transit and transportation, believe me, we could spend lots of time talking about that, and I'd love to.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk a little bit more with Markham Councillor for Ward 2, Howard Shore. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again in a couple of minutes. Hi, and welcome back. I'm with Howard Shore, Councillor for Ward 2 in Markham, and we're talking about high-density development, and what about the infrastructure? Let's not forget about that, Howard. We need the infrastructure to go along with the high-density development. And what I'm thinking of this week, when I think high-density, I think high towers, glass, and what does that make you think of?
Downtown Toronto.
Big problem.
Big problem. I can't speak to what's happening in Toronto, obviously. There's certain safety issues. We take safety very carefully here in Toronto and building standards. It's interesting, I've had a chance to go out with our property standards crews lately to see just how much we enforce and pay attention to property standards issues, whether it's a condominium development or whether it's a single-family dwelling.
So these are inspectors or from the
These
city?
are inspectors that go out.
Okay.
Now, I obviously can't comment on what's happening
Right.
in Toronto, but I do hear from radio reports just this morning, I believe, that the developer is looking at changing all of their glass in all of their developments immediately.
Well, what I heard is that they were going to make some changes to tempered glass.
To tempered.
And what I can't believe is, isn't it supposed to be tempered glass to begin with? I'm quite shocked because, you know, it heats
couldn't
up.
tell you.
And when I was first dispensing spectacles as an optometrist, a lot of people wore glass lenses. It was before the scratch-resistant plastic lenses were available, and the plastic lenses would just scratch so easily that a lot of people were wearing glass, which is dangerous because if you fall down and the glass shatters, we all know what can happen. And the glass had to be tempered, and there was chemical tempering and heat tempering. Heat tempering worked better. It was, you know, some kind of heat process, obviously, and it just meant that the glass, instead of shattering into a lot of little pieces, would break into larger pieces. I don't know that that's the issue with the glass on buildings, how many pieces. It might be even better if it broke into a lot of small pieces instead of large chunks falling down. The reality is it's supposed to be able to withstand heat. And I don't know what process that requires, but obviously it's available. And you would think that we would require in our developments the highest quality of windows and doors and roofing. I know for my house, 10 years into the development, and people were already changing their windows. And we talk about environment, and people are all those windows go to the dump. They're not recycled. And think about all the doors and garage doors and front doors and windows. Why aren't we requiring that good quality is put in to begin with, that it has to have some kind of 20-year guarantee the way Sleep Country gives a 20-year guarantee on a mattress? I think people should have a 20-year guarantee on windows and doors and garage door springs and garage door openers, because not because of the value for the consumer, but because we're so worried about the garbage being collected and the dumps. I can just imagine where these windows and doors are all heading, and now all that glass that's going to be taken down, what's going to be done with it?
With respect to the glass being taken down, I can't tell you. I don't know. That's obviously a City of Toronto issue, but we take our standards very importantly here in Markham.
And I think that's what slows down development, and that's what people have to understand, is that the city has to look into so many different minute details for everybody's safety and efficiency, that it can really slow down the process. It's very easy to say approved, bang, but what about all the protocols?
Well, it's not just a question of safety. I mean, safety is the first issue, but every development, whether it's a condominium development, whether it's a single-family home development, or even, as I was mentioning before, in the Leechcroft area, we're building a brand new community park to service 5,000 units in the area. This will be a showcase park for the rest of the town of Markham.
I'm looking forward to visiting it with you.
It's beautiful. Well, it will be beautiful. The plans at least are beautiful. It's an 8 to 9 acre park. The community has come to me asking about timelines, and we have conceptual drawings right now. But to go from that conceptual drawing to a final park is going to entail putting about a book together that go to everything from the finest detail of what type of molding should go on the shading little architectural houses that cover up the kids' play areas, for instance. So you're right that the devil's in the details, and if you don't get those things right, then a wonderful vision, a beautiful condominium building can be dangerous if you don't get the glass right. If we don't get the details right on the park, the wonderful concept drawing really means nothing.
Well, what I find frustrating is this isn't the first park being designed, and you'd think that communities could work together and could share the planning, and it doesn't have to be starting from scratch. Every single park has to start with a drawing of a gazebo. You know, let's have some standard things that cities can use that are less expensive, because the reality is when you try to do something unique, like the Vaughan City Hall, which is over $20 million over budget, I believe, and I don't think it's complete yet. It's unique. It has a suspended auditorium. It got an environmental rating that's extremely high that the construction company wasn't used to. They had never done a project of this size or this nature before. Whenever you get into something unique, same thing with cars, it's very expensive. And the reality is if people want to spend their own money to have something unique, a special house, something very different, that's their money. But cities and governments seem to forget sometimes that it's not their money to spend, and that maybe the park would be better off going in quicker and not as unique and for less money, but maybe not as ooh la la when people come and see it. It's a tough balance. It's a tough balance.
I think that the key ingredient is what type of consultation you have with the community, because you have to listen to people to get some sense of what they want. And that's not just related to park, but that's community development in general. Communities, the best thing that I do as a councillor, and I don't mean to toot my own horn, but that I hear from constituents, is have a regular Sunday get-together with people, just a coffee clutch. And it's people's opportunity.
At Thornhill Square you do that? Or?
I move it around
Okay.
from one coffee shop to the next to make it
Okay.
equally
to be fair
convenient to
for
people.
everybody.
But it's just a drop in and hear what's on people's minds. And it's not an agenda that I set. It's if you come in and want to talk about roads, we talk about roads. If you want to talk about community centers, we talk about community centers. My point is that the reason that I mention that is the best thing that you can do as an elected representative is listen to people.
But you're listening to the people who are already living in the community or businesses in the community and are already ratepayers paying taxes in the community. What I find is many cities are listening to the people who haven't yet moved into the community. They seem to have a bigger voice sometimes than the people who are already living in the community, and that we have to question.
Well, that may be the case in Vaughan or Toronto, but I can tell you that the folks that come out to my meetings, and I'm a big believer in having regular town halls on different forums, from our budget discussions to revitalization of the Thornhill area in the Bayview and Green Lane community, which is very important to me. That's going to be an exciting project. Or what happens with the developers' Section 37 funding that will go to the German Mills community. I listen to the residents. Doesn't mean to say that you can always do every single thing that folks would like you to do with their community. But to go back to your issue about the parks or community development in general, I think it's important to really be good listeners rather than tell people what you'd like to see. I mean, I have my opinions, but when I sit down, and over the last few years, when my predecessor sat down with the folks in the Leachcroft community, they talked about parks. They talked about what people would like to see. They take a look at how different the makeup of the community is in Leachcroft versus elsewhere, and one community might want something that's a little bit more geared. I don't think our parks, I guess I would take a little bit issue with you and say, I don't think our parks need to be cookie cutter.
Yeah.
I think that they should suit the appropriateness of the local community and have community input, I think, into the development of our neighborhoods is incredibly important.
Well, I would agree with you if the parks were going to be developed in conjunction with the homes being built. Then we have lots of time to be unique. But as somebody who spent many days in the park with my 4 kids, wouldn't want to be in a community with my kids, waiting for a park to be developed. By the time the park is built, my kids have grown up and have no need for a park.
Well,
and that's a
doesn't
problem.
take quite that long.
Well, how long? A few years?
There's a window of opportunity from a construction point of view. So constructing a park usually happens between end of May, June till October. Those are from a construction point of view, what they can do in terms of land not being too wet and not being too cold. And then it becomes a political question, how quickly something gets approved and financed. So we, for example, in the town of Markham, we approved the funding for this Leechcroft Park in March of this year. All of the documents all of the administrative component will be done by January of 2012. A shovel will be in the ground by November because it can't be in the ground earlier. And by October, that park will be done. So about an 18-month period. And the unfortunate thing is that even if the administrative component were shortened, we can't put a shovel in the ground earlier. So there are certain logistics behind park construction that I've just been educated over.
Right, exactly. But that's the plan. And then I think that the other part that people complain about is when they're having landscaping done on their house, their contract has a timeline, and the contractor has to abide by that timeline, and often there's penalties. And why isn't that being done in municipal contracts more often, that whoever is, we don't care about the weather, we don't care about if your tractor broke down. That is your problem. You have agreed to deliver this park ready and finished by this date, and if you have to subcontract it out. There are plenty landscaping companies out there. Why doesn't that seem to happen on the municipal level where things are delayed forever?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm very big on giving people timelines. We can't always do things. I think that one of the key ingredients about being transparent to people over any issue, whether it's a construction issue or whether it's a funding issue, doesn't make a difference what the matter is. If you set out to people, here's when I expect certain things to happen, and that you can follow along. You can mark your chart on the calendar to see that this has been done by this date, this has been done by that date. I think that even if it's not as quick as people would like, I think that the community is much happier when they can follow along and see, I don't want to ever go to the community and say, you'll be happy in the end, it'll get done, don't worry, trust me. I'd rather go to folks and say, the park is going to take this amount of time. You can mark and see that the tender documents will be in by January. They'll be approved by February, March. We'll take them, we'll have executed contracts by May. These will all be public documents, and you'll see a shovel breaking ground in June, and lay that out. And that's now posted on my website, and not just for the park, but for anything that we're doing.
Would it happen faster if you divided the park into different parcels and had different companies in charge of each part?
Probably not.
And maybe,
Probably not.
Maybe they felt a little competitive to get their part done. I think that's what's often lacking in these contracts, is once they get the contract, they don't feel that they need to make the effort to work around the clock and get it done.
We're building this happens to be the biggest of the parks that we're building right now, and I think the most, I say with a bias because it's in Thornhill, but the most exciting of the parks. It's going to be a showcase for the rest of Markham. But I think that there's no shortage of work out there for other park development that we will be having in multiple areas of Markham. So no, I think that the incentive for construction is to get it done as quickly as possible so they can move on to another project.
Okay, well, great. I want to talk to you a little bit again. We're going to go back to what makes a great community. I've been reading up. I admit I don't know everything about I call it the Langstaff development. I know Richmond Hill is a little bit leery about what Markham is planning for. Is it between Highway 7 and the 407
right.
at Langstaff? And part of the development is going to be in the town of Richmond Hill and the rest in the town of Markham? Is
Correct.
that how it's supposed to work?
Yeah.
But my understanding is that Markham is going ahead with 5,000 units, and that's all condo units, or some of it is single family. It's a real condoville. It's all high density with offices and schools, and what's planned for there?
That's the plan right now. There isn't anything finalized, but that's the plan right now.
And it's not contingent on the subway being expanded up
Oh,
to
sure.
that?
We will probably, as was the case with Liberty's World on Young, put in a variety of different phasing or hold provisions that are tied with high order transit being extended. They absolutely have to be.
Yeah. Well, Liberty on Young, it's the World on Young by
Yeah.
Liberty Development is now selling, pre-selling some of the units, but I don't believe they're allowed to actually construct the units until
Correct.
the subway goes in.
Correct.
But they're in a rush to, I guess, sell. I'm not sure why, because I think, you know, if I was them, I would wait as long as I could to sell, because the prices seem to, you know, not just the prices are going up, but I think that the prices will really leap when the shovels go in the ground for that subway. We're going to take one more short break and be right back. So thanks for tuning in, and see you again in a couple of minutes. Hi, and welcome back. We're going to just talk a little bit about what makes a great neighborhood. I've got some notes here from Gordon Stratford, who's quoted in the Globe and Mail. Mr. Stratford is a design director at the architectural firm HOK, never heard of it, but HOK Canada, and chair of Toronto's Design Review Panel. And he says that the best new neighborhoods have 4 pillars of good planning. Financial, which means that it should be affordable. Environmental, and with natural elements, and I guess taking into account the preservation of the natural habitat of the area. Social, so that there's places where people can work and shop and interact. And cultural, which I thought was interesting, because I wouldn't have thought that he would make that a priority. A divine cultural element, maybe depending on the community, that can change. And I think what he's missing is missing accessibility. Because if you're going to have a community, people have friends outside the communities, or business, you know, colleagues or ventures or customers outside the community. And I think what's missing in a lot of the high density development is places for people to park if they're coming to visit by car. The fact is that even if there's great infrastructure, if somebody's coming from, say, Belleville, and they're coming to visit your business, they're not going to be taking public transportation, nor are they from Burlington. And sometimes I think that we're limiting ourselves. We think we're going to turn Toronto into New York City, where most people don't have cars except for on weekends, and they're visiting each other with a great, you know, public transportation plan, but obviously taxis as well. And it's so high dense and it's so interconnected that people are able to manage in New York City without cars. But I don't think we're anywhere near New York City yet in the Greater Toronto area. And I think we've got a lot of roadblocks to making these sort of condovilles a huge success. The Langstaff area, which is mostly in Markham, that's being developed. One of the interesting points that I saw in the York Region News was that there was going to be a school, a public school, I think it was just an elementary school. I wasn't aware of a high school being developed there. And right away, the last thing was the Catholic school board said it had no plans for a Catholic school. Oh, well, I guess the kids who want to go to Catholic school, which is a third of the public school students in the province, are going to have to be bused. So right away, it's a failure as far as I'm concerned, because a third of the kids are going to have to be bused, or, you know, not want to locate in that area. A toughie. We're not going to get into that poison issue. I'm not asking you to address it, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of things grinding successful ventures to a halt, a lot of outside forces, and one of them is the Canadian weather. You know, it's nice to talk about walking and walking and walking and biking, but the reality is even the most seasoned cyclists admit that we're not a southern climate, we're not as mild as, say, New York City, and it's tough. It's tough. We have to accept the fact that we have a long, brutal winter, and we have hot summers where we need air conditioning, and people have pets and people have kids. And as somebody who just recently acquired my first dog, I'm trying to understand how people can live in apartments and have pets.
But they do.
They
and,
do.
And
they
make
do.
it work. You know, your question, what makes good communities, or was it
Yeah.
good neighborhoods?
Well, yeah.
Sure,
And
it's a
people
bit
belonging.
different.
I know. I didn't sort of feel. I felt that was a very cold answer. I agree with you.
But you know, the interesting thing is, I think he may have read our green print plan for sustainability, because it talks about economic, social, and environmental. But within that, when you get down a little bit more granular, and to me, there's a visceral answer to your question, which is people. People are what make good communities, and whether it's the business people, whether it's the homeowner, the concerned business owner that wants to be involved and take some corporate responsibility and be a corporate partner for different events, they make up part of the community. The neighbors that help participate and put together a ball hockey tournament so the kids have something to do on weekends, that makes up good community. The neighbors that get involved, like yourself, on a ratepayer association that looks out for the general welfare of a number of streets in a neighborhood, in part of a ward, that makes up a good community. Ensuring that businesses survive and thrive, so that you as a patron utilize the neighborhood bakery and the neighborhood diner and what have you, that makes up good community.
People
So
have to
people
feel
in the end.
invested in that community being a success.
Absolutely.
And
then it falls to the town to make sure that we are good listeners and we plan well, so that, yeah, there's enough parking, whether it's parking for neighbors that live in the, or homeowners that live in that neighborhood, or people coming to visit you, or you going to visit us in Markham.
Are there any plans for the, say, the Langstaff development to have a shuttle service going to the nearby mall, going to, say, Markham Stouffville Hospital, or some other medical centers, that people could really manage to live there if the subway was nearby, with a shuttle service to the subway and to some major shopping, health centers? Is that in the plan?
I wouldn't rule it out. It's too early to speculate on that right now, but I can tell you that even in dealing with Liberty Development regarding the World on Young, that is now in the plans. So one developer, and that came at the instigation of the developer. That actually didn't come from the town. The developer volunteered that notion. Now, whether it's just linked to subway or major plazas versus the hospital might be a little bit out of their catchment area, but that's in the works for World on Young. I don't see why it wouldn't be extended. We're sort of setting a bit of a, not a precedent, but I think one developer is going to learn from another that if the subway isn't there in a timely fashion, that they have to provide that type of outlet for their residents to access.
Would a shuttle bus be considered a bus for an HOV lane?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know offhand. I don't. If the bus is if the bus is a Viva or YRT bus, then potentially.
Yeah, I don't know if a shuttle bus would, but I know that there are some communities in the States, and it's considered part of your maintenance fee, just like a gated community or the concierge or anything like that.
But we're
it's
looking
part
at
of
these on an interim basis, not as a permanent solution.
Well, if the subway, unless the subway is coming into the complex, if we really want to figure out a way that people aren't going to have cars, I'm aware of buildings downtown Toronto where they can't fill their parking, because living and working downtown, people have really given up their cars. So, okay, we've got a bit of New York moving in, but to visualize that kind of environment up north of Steeles, I couldn't even envision it north of the 401. So I don't see it. I don't see it happening. I don't see paid parking happening anytime soon. So we have to. People are expecting to have parking for businesses, or they're not going to frequent those businesses. The reality is there's just too much competition among the stores, and we're going to put a lot of businesses out of business if there isn't parking made available for people. And if people can't get there,
we're not considering changing our parking parking ratios, space ratios for parking for businesses at all right now. hasn't even been on the radar.
Okay, well, I hope not. I'm very concerned, especially along the Yonge Street corridor, and we're going to both be watching to see how things pan out because, as we both know, the Yonge Street is a little bit of a parking lot, even in the middle of the day.
Absolutely.
And to bring in that many cars, I just don't understand where we're going to put them all. I'm very concerned about that entire corridor. That is, Yonge Street, as we all know, is the longest street in the world, or one of the longest street in the world, and it's a real heart. It's the real heart of the GTA in my mind.
But here's the thing, Gila. We need a comprehensive transit strategy. It can't be a Maiden Markham, it can't be a Richmond Hill, and it can't be a Vaughan, and certainly although one of the major players has to be the City of Toronto, it can't be a Toronto plan. It has to be a Greater Toronto Area transportation plan because nothing is a silo. There are people that live in Vaughan that work in Markham and vice versa, or live in different parts of Vaughan.
So why don't we just amalgamate all the transit systems? Is that what you're hoping for?
No, what I am suggesting is that we lock all three levels of government in one room and
we throw away the key until they come up with a solution.
Until they come out, and we don't feed them, and maybe
I'm with you.
Pull out a little bit of the oxygen or pump more in so they can think a little bit better. But you know, and folks have asked me about this upcoming election, provincially, what should be one of the most important issues, and it has to be transportation. Okay. And the key is don't let anybody from any party off the hook unless they tell you that what the funding is and going back to your point previously, what the timelines are.
Wow.
Because if somebody just says, I have this wonderful plan, if it doesn't tell you how it's going to be paid for, or what the timelines are, it's just a lofty goal or a dream, and it'll be a nice book that gets put on a shelf. And say, there, we've got the big move, or we've got we've got a plan, but minus the funding and minus the timelines, and I don't believe it.
Well, the reality is that it takes 15 years to build a subway. To the start of actual digging for it to be completed, a new line. And I'm gonna keep mentioning this every time we discuss the subway, that it should be going to the airport. Why we need a whole new rail system to go to that airport, I don't understand. It's very frustrating to me to look at what's being planned for the whole GTA. It's very disjointed. It's as though the only people going to the airport are from downtown Toronto. We're getting to York University very soon. If you look at a map and you take Finch at Jane and you go west along Finch, what do you hit? The airport. Why the heck are we going further north along Jane? The subway should get to York University, doesn't have to go further than Finch, and then move on west. So I'm frustrated because it doesn't seem to be happening. The present government
is the feet to the fire of every candidate running in the next election, October 6th.
Yeah, it's very, very frustrating to me that we're such a major metropolitan center, and I think we're probably the only really large metropolitan center in the world that doesn't have a subway going to the airport. I'm from Montreal, and I can tell you, Montreal has a beautiful transit system. It could be better. It's still not making itself out to the West Island of Montreal, but you know, again, whatever was done previously is still, I think, being maintained very well, and the stations are beautiful. Now, New York City has a very, you know, in-depth subway system, but I don't know if you've been down in there lately. It's pretty scary down there. So I don't think that's what we want in Toronto. I think we want to have a subway system that people feel comfortable using. It's safe and you know, accessible for people with disabilities and things like that.
It's an economic driver.
Yeah, and you know what? Too many announcements saying that due to personal injury that the subway is stopped. Maybe we have to build those walls that open up, because personal injury means to me that somebody unfortunately chose to end their life in our subway system, and the costs to business in this city is huge. And I think that's something that also we have to hopefully address in the near future. We did it with the Bloor Viaduct, and it doesn't look pretty, but unfortunately it's part of a large metropolitan center that we have to help people in any way we can. So Howard, it's been great having you on the show.
My pleasure.
And a hot day. I hope you're going to be resting your knee and not working too hard. I know you're going out with some of the crews, so maybe you'll take a little break from, what are you calling it? Work?
Job for the day.
Job for a day. So
Best way to experience anything is to actually do it. And I've had a blast going out, picking up garbage to bylaw enforcement and our contact center. And I work in one of our camps tomorrow.
Oh, the camps. That'll be fun. So bring your bathing suit and lots of sunscreen and a hat. So thanks again, and everybody, thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.